Alrighty, and let me pin you. All right, everyone. So today we have Dash Shaw. He is a comic book artist, writer, animator. Would you like to introduce yourself and maybe talk about
Um,
some works my students might have seen of yours, whether
I'm in
static or
animation.
animated?
In animation I wrote and directed Cryptozoo. That's on
Mhm.
Hulu. And before that's my second feature. Before that, I did a movie called My Entire High School Sinking into the Sea that you can watch on. I mean, it's on. You can rent it anywhere.
It's on
Amazon,
Hoopla Digital too, actually. I was
Hoopla.
watching it the
Cool.
other day.
I think Cryptozoo's on Canopy.
Okay, great.
um, too, maybe. I've also drawn a lot of books. Most
Mhm.
recently, Discipline from the New York Review of Comics, the NYRB comic line.
Great. So, you've kind of spanned both comic book art and now animation. What's kind of your history with drawing and animation? What kind of got you interested in it?
Well, I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and um, so if you like drawing, it's you get it through comics and
Mhm.
cartoons. I mean, there's the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts here, which we're grateful for, but it's not really like a gallery
Sure.
town. Um, and it was before the internet, when I was a youngin', so it was. Getting things in print magazines and kind of looking at a still for something. So
Mhm.
if you like to draw, um, it was the the place where you saw drawings, and particularly figurative drawings.
Mhm.
um, Comics, and if you like the X-Men comic, there's the X-Men cartoon on TV.
Right.
You like the Peanuts comic, there's the Charlie Brown Christmas special. So it always felt like there was a comic cartoon connection. um, and then especially in the 90s, when there were so many Japanese comics and cartoons coming over, where
Mhm.
they would be like Akira is
Right.
based on a comic that the same person drew, and they wrote
Sure.
directed the movie. There were a lot of things like that. So it was also during independent cinema boom in the 90s, and
Mhm.
so it was like enjoying DIY culture,
Mhm.
zines, and comics and cartoons were all connected. I think a lot of people um, felt the same, got swept up in that same kind of moment. But I think that the particular things that created me, maybe why I'm
Mhm.
doing these independent features and other people aren't, is that I really liked a kind of limited animation, particularly in those Japanese cartoons, that
Mhm.
to me felt connected to independent cinema. Whereas, like,
Mhm.
I could tell that it was possible to be made by a few people, that they
Right.
were kind of idiosyncratic, and even very like kind of formal things, like a kind of dissonance between the voices and the performances of the characters. Like the Speed Racer performances are very different than Jafar and Disney.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
kind of a mannered, um, kind of less is more ethos, as opposed to
Sure.
like the gooey Jafar
Mhm.
gestures. So that was one part, and then another part was meeting Jane, who's the animation director on Cryptozoo, and she was a real After Effects wizard, and
Mhm.
we fell in love, and so she wanted to work on these things, and I'd write things that I thought she would want to participate in. So that was another huge thing that kind of made these projects possible.
Great. So
Because
I
I'd meet cartoonists that would want to do animated movies, but they would want to the what they had in their head was a giant $30 million thing, whereas what I had in my head was a limited animation thing, more like Belladonna of Sadness or something like that. Like, to me, that
Sure.
was the goal and not a concession.
Right. No, I saw Cryptozoo, and one thing I really liked about it was it definitely felt different than what you would see from like a Disney type studio or a Pixar or even something like Leica or something like that, where it had a very particular style, which made it very unique and very interesting in that regard. So I know you come from. So I know you come from kind of you started off more in comic books, and a lot of comic books are about character design. And so my students have been doing character design as part of their animation. Do you have any sort of tips or sort of advice for students when they're developing a character or thinking about that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can only say things that were meaningful to me.
Sure, sure.
I guess I'll just anecdotally throw some things out there. And for my first movie, my entire high school singing to the sea.
Mhm.
I drew it before I had the voice actors,
Okay.
so no one, it would be impossible to intentionally match the actors to the faces.
Right,
Um,
right.
and and I and I thought a kind of Charlie Brown like dot for eyes thing would be
Mhm.
empathetically um, effective.
Mhm.
Um, but when it came out, I felt like it was a missed opportunity, that there was less specificity in the character design. They were kind of more general people. And while
Mhm.
I love Peanuts, and I love a lot of cartooning that has a general mode,
Mhm.
I found for me in the theater that um, something was missing, and that I was looking at a giant wobbly dot eye and I wasn't
Mhm.
connecting. And so in Cryptozoo, I tried to draw, they weren't based on the people, but I tried to
Mhm.
take some kind of sideways inspiration from the voice actor. And I feel like
Right.
this would be applicable even if you even if you could not get a voice actor, just in terms of the
Sure.
character design. I thought, okay, every face in this movie has to be interesting enough, because a lot of the movie is going to be looking at this person's face.
Right.
Um, Not to sound too dumb about it, but
Sure.
it's true. So, let's make these people interesting looking.
Sure.
Um, and I kind of took something from anime. Jane
Mhm.
gets credit for this. A eye that kind of shifts in it, because in a lot of anime, the face may be a still drawing, but the eyes have a little. Usually, it's a light in it, a
Right.
light
Yeah.
reflecting.
The kind of
And it kind of
highlight.
gives the illusion of a soul in there. Um,
Mhm.
so that kind of helped make it not feel like you're looking at a slideshow, or not that I'm opposed to slideshows, but
Sure.
a still painting. Um, and sometimes in designing characters, there's um, uh, things that kind of are check boxes in the script, meaning like, okay, I know this character has to have X because it's a plot point.
Sure.
But then other things become ways to make people a little more interesting, and
Mhm.
maybe undercut something that would be um, and maybe to go against something that might be expected, um, someone
Right.
to look differently than you would expect them to look.
Well, I think what I'm hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you're trying to get the humanity out of the character so that when people sort of see the character, whether it's a comic book character or an animated character, that they can feel the character in some way. Is that fair to say? Or
Yeah, I mean, that would be great. Both of the movies I've done kind of are in comic booky worlds
Sure.
or are in archetypes, and that for some reason that's appealing to me, or I find it like kind of like symbolic beings. Um, but usually if you it's a little hard to just talk abstractly. Like I could maybe talk about a particular character design, but
sure. Maybe you can give us like a short example of one character from a movie that you designed, and maybe why you chose to draw it that way.
hmm. Well, the main character in Cryptozoo, Lauren, she I took she, I she's played by Lake Bell,
Mhm.
um, and in her voice and in her appearance, she has a kind of pre-Raphaelite look. The paintings of
Mhm.
Dante Gabriel Rossetti of this woman named Jane Morris, where there's photos of her, and she really looked like these paintings.
Mhm.
Um, and it's a very iconic, like lots of teen girls who are into fantasy art have posters of Jane Morris on their walls.
Mhm.
um, but I hadn't seen that particular look in a movie before.
Mhm.
I had only seen it in paintings,
Right.
so I thought it would be okay to kind of riff on these paintings. He's been dead long enough.
Mhm.
His copyright lawyers are not going to come after me with any
Right.
similarity. And
Sure.
it's a very like iconic look that yeah, if a bunch of other movies had a person that looked like that in it, I wouldn't have done it. But I think we might be the only one.
Sure.
um and for people who are familiar with those paintings, it's quite I think the reason that they've stuck around for so long is that it would be hard. I wonder if I could even articulate it, but there's a combination of quote unquote masculine, quote unquote feminine, you know, characteristics that are coexisting in
Mhm.
space, um, and that's compelling. And there's a strength and beauty. So I don't know. It seems to kind of exist between or encompass the norms that maybe are stereotypically seen as opposites, but we all know are more fluid than fluid than are usually presented.
Mhm.
Um, so that seemed to work with the character, because she's kind of um, a hero who does villainous things, and
Mhm.
she has to be able to seem like she can ride a Pegasus, so she's got to be like physically powerful enough to
Right.
do stuff like that. um anyway, that's one example.
Sure. So I mean, it sounds like you had a idea of the personality of the character. You're kind of inspired by some earlier artwork, and you kind of incorporated that. It was unique also, like you said, because other studios, at least for cartooning, weren't using that style of character. Is that fair to say? Or
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I could be wrong. I think that's been a trend. um the that but it wasn't written that way in the script.
sure.
I only came through that through Lake. If someone else had been cast, it would have that
You
character
may
would have
have
looked
changed it.
different. It would have been a
Sure.
very different movie, because a lot of the movie is looking at her face.
Right,
Um,
right.
Phoebe was an interesting one. The Gorgon.
Mhm.
And it was important to me that she look Greek, and
Okay.
we got a great Greek actor to play her, Angeliki
Mhm.
Papoulia, because usually, um, Gorgons are Greek. They come from Greek mythology, but they've somehow
Right.
been other countries have decided that,
Sure.
that they're
Sure.
theirs.
Right.
Um, and at some point, and she's a humanoid, or she's a cryptid, but she covers her hair with this kind of spotted thing that actually came from looking at old catalogs of 60s fashion, because
Right.
I was thinking like of something a young woman in the 60s would wear, but she has to cover her snakes, so it's like a um I'm sure I'm there, it's a hood.
Sure.
um and uh and at some point along the line, it was like, okay, the there were like a bunch of different reasons why, but we thought that she should be left uncolored,
Okay.
white, plain.
So that was a deliberate intention.
And there were, and it was kind of like a few different things at once. And As we were working on the movie, we kind of kept thinking of other reasons why it made sense, but
Mhm.
it was an intuitive decision at the time.
Interesting. I wonder if so, some of my for my students, they've heard stories from some of my interviews where people, went to Hollywood and got picked up by different studios at the time. But you've kind of been more independent. Um, Maybe you can talk a little bit about so maybe the process of producing something like Cyptozoo, where you know, so you wanted to create this thing. If as a story falls out of what I would call sort of traditional American film, where it's like it may fall out of the kind of story that maybe a more like a Disney would do necessarily, or something like that. But you wanted to do it, and you I think you mentioned before feeling like you could do it with a small crew. Can you talk a little more about that process?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of it was a long journey, so
Sure.
I'll kind of skip through it. Um, I always I always liked animation, but it felt impossible to do, that I would have
Mhm.
to move to LA, have $1 million,
Sure.
work up, be a third assistant, something or other,
Right.
when I'm about to die, I'll get to direct something that I know
Sure.
what it looked like to me, as an outsider. Um, and But then when I was, and comics were so accessible,
Sure.
especially the kind of comics that I liked, where it just seemed like the person went over to the Kinko's
Right.
Xerox machine,
More
got something
accessible.
to make. Yeah. Um, so uh, then, and this also dates me, in college there was kind of early animations on the internet that felt like they were made by one person, but they were
Right.
all kind of flash animations, and I really liked drawn animations.
Sure.
um, so then I found the GIF function in Photoshop, where you can just scan things and
Right.
press play. And my graphic novels were doing well for me. I was young enough, I didn't spend that much money, and I
Sure.
would really live through different things, but basically through my comics. Like,
Sure.
maybe one of the comics would get optioned, or I would
Right.
get a grant for a comic,
Sure.
or all this. So I had an alternate um
Revenues.
revenue stream. Not stream makes it sound steady, but
Right. Sure.
job. Um, so like when I was at SVA, some other students or people that I knew through comics moved to LA and worked at Cartoon Network and did that
Sure.
whole thing. But I didn't. Uh, Mike, I didn't do that because my because I could live enough off of my comics,
Mhm.
that I then tried to do things independently. Excuse me. And then I got some when I was 24 or something, pretty
Mhm.
young. I did a series for IFC
Mhm.
that ran between movies on the IFC channel called The Unclothed Man in the 35th century AD.
And this was
Um,
a cartoon series or an animated series?
it was an animated series. Yeah, I had done shorts before that. Um, but there was an instance where I was paid,
Mhm.
um, and it was IFC, Independent Film
Right.
Channel, and it was really cool. And I made a weird thing, and
Sure.
so it was the right. Someone encouraged me, at the right time. I'm very, very grateful and kind of surprised that I got that gig then.
Mhm.
Um, and then I spent years after that trying to make a movie in a more normal way.
Okay. Like a
Not
live
more like
action or an
like I
animated
get
film? A live
always
action?
animated.
Yeah, always an animated. Okay.
Yeah. And I went to the Sundance Labs, and that's how I
Mhm.
met a bunch of people.
Mhm.
Um, but that movie never happened, and it really, from my perspective, it came down to, um, well, they couldn't get the money to make the movie,
Right.
and then I said, like, let's try to make it for no money,
Okay.
um, and the people around me weren't interested in that,
Right.
kind of
Sure.
obviously or understandably. So then I started doing High School Sinking, which was a story and sets and everything that um, felt doable.
Okay.
The locations are very limited.
Mhm.
Even I didn't think I would get actors, so I thought it might still be funny with first time actors, with friends,
Right. Right.
voicing those people. Um, so then I had maybe like 80% of it drawn with Jane,
Mhm.
um, and I went to people that I knew at the Sundance Labs,
Mhm.
or I had met at the Sundance Labs, Kyle and Craig. And Kyle had just produced Tiny Furniture.
Okay.
Craig had produced a movie called, or had directed a movie called Compliance that I really like.
Okay.
And they both lived in my neighborhood then.
Mhm.
And so they were like two people who were around my age who had figured out how to make a movie for no money.
Right.
So I showed them what they had, and they said, "We think we can get known actors in this," and
Mhm.
um, that's how we ended up getting a great cast for High School Sinking.
Excuse me.
So when I went to people, I already had most of it drawn. I could show them a Vimeo link of what
Right.
you look like.
Mhm.
Um, but High School Sinking took 5 years. It eventually came
Okay.
out, and it played surprisingly, to my eyes, very prestigious festivals. It played the New York Film Festival and
Mhm.
TIFF, um, uh, and it got distribution from G Kids in the United States, which was amazing. Um,
Mhm.
so then I wrote Cryptozoo, thinking I might have more money, some
More of a
money.
budget.
Um, so I wrote something bigger. Um,
Mhm.
and then but we spent a long time trying to get money for that, and we
Mhm.
only ended up getting the same amount of money as High School Sinking.
Mhm.
Um, High School Sinking, we got some money through Fat Possum Records,
Okay.
paid for the finish because it was already mostly drawn. It was paid for the finishing, um, uh, and so it was a lot of work on the movie for no money, and
Right.
uh,
As is art a lot of times.
yeah,
You always
I
doing things just to do them because you want to do them, and then hopefully you find the money.
there's yeah. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, no, I think students just kind of, want to, because I'm sure some students have an idea that they want to do and they, are in the same situation of, they don't have maybe any connections to, Hollywood people, but they want to do it. And I think, they're just kind of interested in hearing the process. So when you worked on Cyptozoo, how many people worked on it besides yourself?
Jane,
Okay.
Emily was an intern because we live in Richmond, and
Mhm.
so we have ties to VCU where Jane teaches. She teaches in the
Mhm.
animation department there,
Oh, nice.
or it's called the kinetic imaging department.
Mhm.
Um, and some people I know from alternative comics. So
Mhm.
not very many people. Um, yeah, people are always very surprised at how
This is kind of just
so
finding people who wanted to help you on this cool
well
idea.
we
That's
paid.
a-
I
oh,
mean,
you
we
paid
pay
him? Okay,
people
good.
something, not
Yeah,
as
yeah.
much as they deserve.
Sure, yeah.
Um, and that came from kind of independent film financiers when we
Right.
kind of finished high school sinking. Um, and but they've never. I kind of always think I might with the next one have a different scale, but
Mhm.
it hasn't happened. But I've only made two, but still,
Right.
two is quite a lot for
Yeah,
independent
no, that's a lot for
filmmakers.
anyone, especially if you're doing a majority of the drawing. Speaking of the drawing, so you mentioned that you were not really into using, at least at that time, digital programs like Adobe Animate. Do you draw by hand, or are you sort of now using digital programs, or a combination, or
Well, they're drawn. Everything is drawn by hand, but then they're
oh, by hand?
composited on
Right.
like this giant scanner behind me. That's what we use
Yeah,
to
I noticed that. That's why I figured you probably still draw by hand and
scan the
and
paintings, the drawings, and then it's mostly After Effects because that's what Jane knows very well.
sure, sure.
You know,
Great. Um, do you have any advice? I mean, for these are students who, this is like their first, they've gone through maybe one class, they learned some basics. This is not a full-on animation certificate, degree, like, at a like a RISD type situation. But there we have some students who maybe they got a little taste, they're really interested, they want to do their own thing. Do you have any advice for them? Just as an animator, from one animator to another, like,
um, I kind of um, it's so hard to just kind of say vague things, but
yeah, sure, I
I
understand.
can say um, I can say things. Some, again through VCU, I'm sometimes forced to give some kind of advice because people ask.
If you don't want to give advice, you don't have to. I'm not going to
But
force
the
you.
only kind of something that I feel is undervalued
Mhm.
is I always say just take a writing class,
Mhm.
because even if you um, even if you don't want to write the cartoons,
Sure,
um, a lot of directing is writing.
sure.
Meaning I have to write an email to someone to explain something or other. I have to communicate, that's you're communicating what you want to do.
Right.
Usually you have to communicate in the form of words.
Sure.
Um, so learning to write will help you in so many ways
Mhm.
that maybe aren't so obvious.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's great advice, because I think, I mean, obviously animation and drawing are a visual communication in here, but you're also expressing ideas, story, we didn't talk too much about story in this interview, but obviously you have a history with storytelling through your comic books and through your movies and such. Great. Where can my students check out your work and check out any upcoming projects that you or your friends might be working on, or that you're part of?
I have an Instagram. That's my
Mhm.
name dash
Okay.
underscore Shaw. And yeah, if you haven't seen Cryptozoo on Hulu, check it out. Um,
Mhm.
thanks so much for adding me.
Yeah, it's great. And I'll also post, is it okay if I post your website to the students too? All right,
Sure.
will do. All right. Well, thanks very much, Dash. We appreciate your time as always. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.